Greetings, traveler.
Hey guys, and welcome to my first Rise of the Mechs meta update. For those of you who don't know, the arena has yet undergone a significant change as planned. Every 2 months or so now, Blizzard will be rotating in different sets, and we've just had one of those rotations. So right now we are playing with the Goblins vs. Gnomes, the Grand Tournament, Karazhan, Boomsday, and Rise of Shadows expansions. And obviously, Classic Basic is also in as usual. What does that mean? The biggest change I would say, and this is going to be a really huge one for those of you who have not been playing the game for a couple of years, is that we are in a really fast meta. This feels way more like how the arena used to feel, which is normal because we are playing with old cards, or at least partially old cards. So 2 drops are back, 1 drops are in. There's just such low curves that I see going around. It's probably not the only way you can play, but it's definitely the default way. So let's first take a quick peek at HS Replay to see what the class win rates look like right now. So we have Paladin, Mage, Rogue as the top 3, which is not a coincidence because Paladin, Rogue, Mage have been top 3 for a long time in the past because they just, got good hero powers, good cards, everything just works well. If you look at Paladin, the cards they've received now, there's cards such as Muster for Battle, Coghammer, Seal of Champions, absolute powerhouses that are back now. So if you have not played yet, prepare for those. They can just win the game on, let's say, a well-placed Muster for Battle on turn 3 feels like you're just, you've won or you've lost, depending on what side of the table you're on. When we look at the other win rates, we see that apart from Warrior and I'd say to an extent Priest as well, it's fairly balanced. Now, when you look at Priest and Warrior, they're definitely down there. Shaman, fairly low as well. But honestly, for a first go at the expansion, I think we're doing all right. Now, that is partially because Rise of Shadows has been out for more than 2 months now, I assume. So Blizzard has been able to gauge how those cards do. Some buckets have been moved. But I still expect that there will be a round of either bucket changes or micro adjusts to try and push everything closer to 50, as is the desire they've expressed. Now, Warrior being 38% is not really a surprise. It's, for the most part, always been a fairly unplayable class. Now, there are always ways where you can try to make it work, especially if the curves are this low. If you just go super aggressive as a Warrior, you can probably do way better than 38%. But why then not just draft one of the other classes and probably just do better? So that's sort of the attitude I have towards Warrior right now. You could probably make it better than 38%, but why bother? You can just play something else and do better anyway. So we're going to have a look at some deck lists. I have only been playing for 3 days this expansion. I know it's been out for a bit longer, but I've just recently returned from my trip to LA. I've been jet lagged and, all the unpleasant stuff that comes with sleep deprivation. But I'm feeling all right now, and I've done a lot of, those 3 days have had a lot of volume in them, probably an average of 6 arenas a day or so. So yeah, that's 18 runs, still pretty decent sample size, at least for this early in the expansion. So let's go have a look. So my first, let's quickly revisit the win rates. Like my first observation, I would say, is that the top 6, all of them feel super playable. And I'll elaborate on each and every one of them except Rogue, because I just haven't had a Rogue yet, which is a little frustrating. Because I think Rogue is going to be really good. I see good players doing well with Rogue, and Rogue has, at least to what I remember, been really good and a bit lower for more average players because Rogue is a bit tougher to pilot than Mage and Paladin. So it's entirely possible that Rogue is better than Mage and Paladin, and I've been doing quite well with Druid Hunter. I've had 1 Warlock, which was fine, but Druid Hunter for me has been doing quite well as well. So it really feels like at least the top 5 is sort of just pretty close together. So, like I said, pretty good for their first go at this meta. Class balance wise, I've been pretty pleased. So let us move on to the tracker. So let's start with the disgusting Paladin deck. It'll be up on YouTube as well if you want to look at the entire run. But yeah, this is what I was talking about. Right? Let's make it a little bigger and nothing's obstructing the view. There we go. So the first thing we're just gonna touch on is let's just count how many cards are in this deck that cost 3 mana or less. Just to give you an idea on what, you know, a Goblins versus Gnomes meta looks like. Because Goblins versus Gnomes packs so much quality early game that I think it will almost always impact whatever meta it's in significantly. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So that's nearly 2/3 of the deck being 3 mana or less. When we look at the late game, we have 1 North Kraken, which is still a powerhouse. I like this more than the Shovel Fist. 1 Sky Golem, 1 Scribe, 1 Valdir, that's it. And you could classify this still as a, you know, heavy-ish deck. Now, I'm sure that lots of players will still draft decks that are heavier, but for my drafts, this has definitely been a little bit on the heavier side. Now, this is just a monster of a deck. I would say a couple of cards really stand out. We'll start over here. Cogmaster, in my opinion right now, is really good because there are so many mechs. If you have not paid attention to it yet, or if you haven't noticed it yet, there's so many mechs in the arena. So anything with mech synergy suddenly becomes a whole lot more viable. Tinkertown Technician hits a lot. Cogmaster is active a lot. And if it's active, it's a flame input out taking 3. That's pretty good. So Cogmaster in this run was amazing, but that's obviously because I had the mechs to support it. 2 shielded minis. This 2-drop is just broken. It's so strong. You can play it into a 3/2. It's really good. You could play it into a 2/3 and it's still gonna be really good. It's just, yeah, you can't go wrong with a shielded mini. 2 upgradable frame bots, which for me were actually quite good. Now, obviously my deck has some synergy with it. We have some buffs, we have some mech synergy, but still, even without the synergy, they felt okay. And I think that's normal for when the meta speeds up, there's a lot more smaller bodies, a lot more 1/1s, a lot more 2/1s, and then having a 1/5 suddenly matters. So the faster the meta becomes, the better these small damage, high health early game minions become. So good on you, Framebot. But then we get to the real disgusting part. We have a Cog Hammer and we have a Muster for Battle. Now these, once again, if you didn't play back when these cards were printed, they are simply unfair. That's the best way to describe them. You're gonna see if you watch the run, every time I play Coghammer or Muster for Battle, when they're good, it's just like, well, it's over, right? Like our opponent can just pack up, goodbye, he's done. Because the game is so snowbally right now that once you get a push on the board, you usually just don't fall off anymore, unless, you know, your opponent has Blizzard Flame Strike, but that is so uncommon right now. The standard way how a game concludes is one person gets ahead, keeps the lead, wins the game. That's sort of how it feels right now. So it might leave a little bit of a sour taste if you're not really used to this, but once you know how to get ahead consistently, you'll see that you can get a pretty consistent win rate, right? Your loss is just going to feel bad because your losses are going to be like, well, I didn't have a 2-drop and I lost the game on turn 2. Whereas if we're playing in, you know, the previous expansions, there's a lot more leeway. There's a lot more ways where you can regain board control, a lot more initiative. All right, so moving on, Seal of Champions, another super strong card and works really well with the frame bots. Kings works really well with the frame bot as well. I probably would have wished that one of the Kings was a true silver, but for the most part, the buffs were really, really strong, given that we had the muster dudes to buff and the frame bots. As I mentioned, a little bit of late game could be classified as a heavier deck, but probably just fine. I think 2 good 6s and 1 thing that's more expensive than 6 is fine. That's usually where I go at. This deck had a Valde Raider, which is technically a 7. So I would say if you're drafting heavier than this, it needs to be premium late game, such as a Kraken or, you know, Violet Sky Golem. Very good cards. All right, so that's a Paladin draft. So let's go over to Mage, which for now for me has been the most control-y, right? When you look at this deck, you're gonna say, whoa, this is not a control deck, Shady. You have so much early game. Because once again, let's do a check, right? 1 to 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So only one card less than the Paladin. Now, some of these cards, Shooting Star is more of a defensive card, Flame Cannon's more of a defensive card. So definitely not all geared towards early aggression, but still pretty low curve. And this low curve is here to defend yourself, not so much to attack the opponent. Because I feel right now when you're playing Mage, your goal is to just survive because you've got a couple of good cards rotating in. You got Violence Portal, which is really the main culprit, I would say, for Mage right now. Super strong card. So my strategy right now with Mage is pick a ton of early games so you don't die, and then pick portals. And then you win because you have portals and you're not dead. That sounds stupid, but it's a pretty simple but effective strategy. Step 1, don't die. Step 2, cast portal. I feel like a lot of people get step 2, but they don't get step 1 yet. Because I see a lot of mages doing not as well as they should because they are underdrafting their early game and they have a bunch of portals, but they're dead. So once you get that concept that the early game is not there to be aggressive with, it's just there for you to survive, and then you just cast portals and you win, that then your Mage runs will start to go a lot better. This deck went 9. I'm all of the time I'm still like just experimenting, like I said, right? It's the first 3 days. My next meta update, I will have a lot more sample size. My decks will be a lot more refined, but I still wanted to give you guys something, right? I didn't want to keep you waiting. Now, another thing when we look at this deck is the turn 3. Turn 3 for Mage is super weak right now. There's not a lot of stuff that you're going to want to draft. So the first Mage run I did actually went 1 and 3. Let's actually quickly go over this list. Now, could this deck have done better? Probably, but I don't think that much better. So you see that I had step 2. I had the portals. But step 1 was not there. I did not have enough early game to survive, and I felt that. So Magic Trick feels way worse. It feels like it's just too slow. 1 mana to discover something that's probably not gonna swing you back on the board unless it's like an Arcane Explosion or Shooting Star. It's just not good enough. Conjure's Calling feels worse. Still good, but worse. Just because it requires you to be the head on board. And as I mentioned earlier, once you're head on board, it sort of feels like you were winning already. So, not that it's suddenly a bad card, but it's worse than before. Faceless Rager also feels just tougher to get off, because once again, first of all, you need to be on board, and then you get to play a Rager, but usually when you're on board, yada, 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 it feels like you've already won. So, I'd say that were some mistakes when I drafted this deck. I was not concerned enough with staying alive in the early game. I had too many awkward cards, right, such as the Ragers and the Magic Tricks. But then I learned from my mistakes, drafted tons of early game, and it went quite well. But yes, turn 3. Spellslinger is a card in particular that I dislike because the effect is so random. You give your opponent a spell. For most of my runs, he does more harm than good, because when I get a good spell, usually if I have this kind of curve, I was going to be fine anyway. And if I give them a really good spell, they might actually swing the board and get back into the game. That being said, Spellslinger is a spider tank, and you guys know I love spider tanks, so I've always been a little torn between this card because I hate its effect, but I love its stat line. For this meta, I feel like I have to put myself past the effect and just say, all right, well, it's a 3-mana 3/4, and Mage right now struggles really hard with getting good 3-drops, so you're going to have to pick it. And that worked for me. Now, I think he did lose me at least one game. I think he gave the opponent Elemental Destruction, and I was just like, okay, well, my entire board is gone. Cool, thank you, Spellslinger. But other than that, he's there on turn 3, and if you skip your turn 3 or you have a really weak turn 3, you probably have a higher chance of losing anyway. So it's sort of like a necessary evil. Then Argent Horse Rider, not in this list right now, but another 3-drop that I really like. There's initiative on it. It's a 3 mana 2/1 Divine Shield charge, back when Blizzard printed the charge cards. These days that would have definitely been a rush minion. So it can go face if you needed to, which is useful. Ogre Brute is another 3-drop that I like more than just regular 3/3s. You guys know I hate 3/3s, but still Ogre Brute when you're defending, not quite so reliable. So you really want to have, you know, that good early game here so you're not entirely reliant on the Ogre Brute to get you back on board. Then Tinkertown Technician, as I mentioned, is a lot better right now because you get a lot more mechs. Then some strong 4s really help, got some shredders. Proud Defender feels pretty good in Mage right now because, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to pressure your opponent, you just need to survive and you win. The exception, I would say, is playing against either Priest, but you don't see that many Priests right now because I think Priest sucks. The reason why I think Priest sucks is Priest sucked before they got a bunch of OP cards. They had to print Talon Priest, they had to print Potion of Madness. You know, they printed so many strong priest cards to try and just like push them over the edge and say, all right, you're viable now. And now that those cards dropped off, you're like, well, back to where we were. Now, priest in general suffers a lot for when the game speeds up this much because priest requires the game to be a little slower, get something on the board, get some hero power value, maybe get, you know, Mass Hysteria later on or the Dragonfire Potion, both of those cards not in right now. So not quite what you want for Priest. But anyways, Mage, your main worry when you're playing this style. Against Mage, I actually find that I need to be aggressive because most Mages, they will not draft as much early game. So this is usually early on when you face Mages. They haven't encountered enough aggro decks yet, so they're still alive, they're still in the run. So they will probably draft a ton of Ravens, the 3 mana 3/2 that discovers a minion. They'll probably have a ton of portals. When you're playing against those decks, you actually need to pressure them because you will lose the value game, which usually speaking is not that much of a problem because you have the early game and they don't. So just so that you keep that as a reminder, versus Mage, you are the aggro versus almost any other class, like maybe just not Priest. You will be the control. All right, so gives you a general idea what a Mage deck looks like right now. Then let's move on to Druid. Now, I did tell you guys that I haven't played Rogue yet, so I will try to get a Rogue run up as soon as I get one offered. But as I said, until now, I haven't seen one. Druid's been pretty darn consistent for me. I think I've done, let's see, we've had a 5, a 7, and an 8, which is okay. The 5, I was definitely still like trying to figure it out. Well, still am, but I figured it out a bit better. So the way how I'm drafting Druid right now is I'm giving priority to the buffs because the early game is so plentiful. Whereas before, if I would be drafting Token Druid, I would be a little bit more careful with overpicking the buffs because the early game wasn't as plentiful. You pretty much just had Acorn Bearer. But right now you have Acorn Bearer, you have Enchanted Raven, you have Living Roots. There's, you know, like you see here, Mecharoo, there's a ton of 2-drops. So with Druid right now, it feels really good to just go all in on the token style and you get it really consistently because you have Power of the Wild, you have Blessing of Ancients, you have Savage Roar, and then tons of early game available. So Druid feels pretty darn consistent just going for the token style, prioritizing the buffs and then letting the late game flesh out itself, or sorry, early game flesh out itself. Forest 8 is still phenomenal and also means that you just don't need as much late game. Because once again, when you look at this list, you have what? A Mukla, Forest 8, and that's kind of it, right? The rest is 5 mana cards. So these curves, they're just way, way lighter than anything we've seen the past few years. And that's just because Goblins vs. Gnomes was such an impactful expansion. So many premium 2-drops. And then the Grand Tournament also had a good amount of 2s, one of them being the Flame Juggler, super strong early game card. Can literally just win the game on turn 2. If, let's say your opponent plays a 2-3, you play a Juggler and it hits his guy, suddenly he played a 2-2 into your 2-3, and you're ahead for no other reason than you played Flame Juggler. So yeah, super strong card, can be really impactful. Then Hunter, my personal favorite as always, has been doing well. 3 Hunter runs right now. We got a 10, an 8, and a 7. So I'm not going to go over the 10 win too much. I'll like glance over the deck, but I was just messing around and I wanted to draft an aggro control deck, and you can look at this curve. It's just nutty, right? If I want to do the same thing where we count the 1 to 3 mana cards, this deck is nutty. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, right? So 6 cards that didn't cost 3 or less, which is ridiculous. But I love playing these kind of decks. They're just super aggro early and then just reach to close out the game. But I think those are, once again, a bit harder to draft, a bit harder to play. You can just play a regular curve hunter. So if we look at this deck had a Leroy in it, but honestly wasn't even that amazing. I would have rather just had a good curve card. A lot of this expansion is just curving out and getting control of the board, pushing face damage with your minions. One card in particular that I feel is back is Freezing Trap. Now, part of the reason here is, the entire reason is that you have a lower curve, but it has 2 effects. So first of all, because you have a lower curve, you can keep your opponent's board clear of any unwanted little tokens quite easily. Whereas if you are a slightly slower deck and you have Freezing Traps, it's really annoying because your minions are bigger. You don't want to send a Soldier of Fortune into a 2/2, like you want to smack them in the face for 5. But if you have a bunch of smaller minions, it's a lot easier to keep the board clear. Glaive Zuka is back, another phenomenal early control card. If it's Glaive versus Highmane, it's like a slam dunk Glaive for me right now. Maybe my opinion will change throughout the meta, but I don't think so. Glaive has always been so good in the fast meta, whereas Highmane gets worse the faster the game gets, in my opinion. Because, you put it down, people can ignore it if you're not sufficiently ahead on board. And, one of the ways to get sufficiently ahead on board is the Glaive Zuka. The other reason why Freezing Trap performs better is because you have this lower curve, you're actually pushing phase damage early. So one of the best turns, in my opinion, to Freezing Trap is turn 4, because that's really where your opponent wants to transition into the mid game and where he wants to start punishing you for having a lighter draft. So you have, let's say you have 2 2/3s on the board, let's say 2 River Crocs, where I just illustrate this, and your opponent plays a Piloted Shredder. Oh my lord, that's so annoying, right? That's a 4/3 that's gonna respawn, that's gonna free kill your 2/3. Well, we play Freezing Trap, we put a 3/2 on the board, we smack him in the face, he attacks, his Shredder gets frozen, the game's over. It's just so strong. Works on Yetis, works on 3/5, so turn 4, an excellent Freezing Trap turn. So when I draft Freezing Traps, I try to add more 2-drops to my deck to make sure that turn 4 I can play Freezing Trap and a 2-drop. Because you'll see that in this deck, I only have Piloted Shredder as my turn 4 card, but with 2 Freezing Traps and a bunch of 2-mana cards, that's not too bad. Now, I do think that you'd rather add 1, maybe 2 more good 4-drops, but you can see that this deck still went infinite, 7 wins, without any other 4-drop, just because we had those Freezing Traps. Then Cloaked Huntress is back. That's a spider tank that's quite easy to pick up. I talked about how the Mage struggles with the turn 3, Hunter struggles less, but still you want to pick up those strong 3s when you can. It feels like Animal Companion is more draftable right now, mainly because I feel like in these super fast decks, Hounds are a little worse, because you really want to go fast, and Hounds is a bit more reactive. And we already talked about how I'm not like a huge Highmane fan right now, so Animal Companion feels like it's draftable again. Mark Shot also feels like it got worse, because you're spending 4 mana to deal 4. Whenever you're in such a tempo-oriented meta, such a fast meta, you really have to look at, okay, what does the card do for me right now? Because Mark Shot is an amazing value card where it deals damage and gets you a card and gives you options. But in essence, you're still paying 4 mana to deal 4. And you can do better than that. Like for instance, with a Freezing. You could pay 2 mana to do what the Mark Shot would have probably done. You don't get the card, but that's okay because you're playing for tempo. So right now, whereas before it would be a windmill slam, take the marked over the freezing. I'm not even sure if they're offered in the same pack. But now you do vice versa. You pick the freezing and ignore the marked shot because the freezing is much faster and it's a fast meta. Yeah, I feel like this deck was even a tiny bit too heavy. It had double Unleash the Beast and High Main. I think that when you're playing Hunter, you're probably good with just having 2 6s. I think that's fine. Like Unleash the Beast and a Scribe, 2 Unleash the Beast High Main. I think that this was still okay because they're all pretty premium. And this High Main was picked, I think, pretty far towards the end. I think it was actually up against like a Marked Shot and a Animal Companion. And I was like, you know what? Feel like I have enough 3s, this and that. I'll just pick the High Main. And it was okay, but it definitely wasn't amazing. The first Glaive was up against the High Main, and chat was a little shocked when I just snap picked the Glaive over the High Main. But yeah, Glaive is super strong. Because imagine this scenario. You coin a 2-3 with a Glaive in hand. What can your opponent do? He could play a 3-2, gets wrecked by the Glaive. He could play a 2-3, the Glaive turns your 2-3 into a 3-3. Suddenly you have a 3-3 killing a 2-3. You have 2 charges of a Glaive and a 3-1 on the board on the end of turn 2 and his board is empty. Super strong. So Glaive Zuka really turns the coin into a weapon where you're like, well, if I have a 2-3 in the coin, I'm quite likely to win this game. So yeah, very good. In general, something else I want to give to you guys, or I mean, impart some knowledge. I like 2-3s a lot more than 3-2s right now. It feels like there's so many beats to a 3-2. The Hench Clan Hawksteed is still in. The Piggy, that's one. Argent Horse Rider is very similar to the Piggy, also just destroys 3-2s. You have Glaive Zuka, Stormforged Axe, there's still a reasonable amount of Shamans around. Spring Rocket is back in, that's another 2 damage. So there's so many punishes for playing a 3-2 right now, early game, and not as many for a 2-3. Now, the punish for playing a 2-3 is your opponent develops a good 3-drop, but a lot of the time, if you go coin, you can coin your 2-3, maybe play your 3-2 on turn 2, or you can, say, have that Glaive and even up the damage or whatnot. Anyways, that's enough for Hunter. What do we have left? I believe a Warlock, right? Because I haven't gone over the Rogue yet because I don't have any Rogue drafts. This Warlock, like I said, I've only done 1 and it went 6 wins. So not the worst, but I definitely learned a lot of stuff from this run. So Omega Agent, I sort of didn't want to pick it because it felt like, man, in a meta this fast, it's probably not going to be as amazing. But I wanted to pick it just to feel it, right? Just to make sure. And yeah, felt super blah. I played it for 3 guys one time and I died the turn after. It was just, yeah, not exactly what you're looking for right now. So no longer worth it. This deck had 2 Soulfires, a Coil, a Shadow Bolt, an Implosion. Definitely felt like a little bit too much. A Dark Bomb as well. I think that Shadow Bolt has gotten worse again. I was never really a huge fan of Shadow Bolt, and then I sort of came around to it slowly as the meta slowed down. And I think now I need to like reverse that process and be like, well, it's a fast meta again. I don't want to pay 3 mana for 4 damage. I want to play a Soulfire, right? I want to pay 1 mana for 4 damage. I don't want to play Shadow Bolt because it's all about that tempo right now. Implosion, still a really good card. This deck had 3 Shredders, and while they were good, they were up against Dread Infernals. And I think right now, what I want to do with Warlock is I just want to go ham on my early curve and pick like 2 Dread Infernals. Because there are so many boards where there's a bunch of 1 health minions around that I feel like a Dread Infernal could just win you the game. So this is still very, experimental. Haven't really tried this out. But that's definitely what I'm going to be doing with Warlock. I'm just going to draft a really strong early curve, super zooey, and then just have Dread Infernals at the end and see how that goes. There's a lot of board states where I'm playing against Warlock and I'm like, oh, please God, don't have a Dread Infernal. So yeah, that's usually a good sign. That usually means the card's going to be quite good. All right. I feel like we've talked about almost everything I wanted to talk about then. Don't want to go too long. So maybe just some final observations. As I mentioned, I like the 2-3 over the 3-2 right now. I like Kraken over Shovel Fist. A lot of the time, your opponent will shovel fist something and then they'll finish it off with Kraken, and then you'll be like, I still have my guy. Or if you Kraken something and they shovel fist into it, the shovel fist dies, which is fine. So Kraken feels superior to shovel fist in almost every way. Curve. A lot of the time, the number I'm aiming for right now is around 11 1 to 2 mana cards. If I can get that, I'm feeling fairly safe. Now, that doesn't mean you need 11 and just pick a bunch of bad cards. A lot of the time, it just ends up where I have, say, like 3 1 mana cards and 8 2 mana cards, of which, let's say we're drafting Mage. Ideally, you get like, 3 1 drops, 6 2 drops, and 2 flame cannons. I'm just, giving you a generic example here. So I'll probably have more concrete numbers once I have a bigger sample size and really go over everything. But that's just the number I got in my head right now. 11 1 to 2 mana cards has been good for me. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching the video. I hope that it helps. As I said, I'll try to get a second meta update video out as soon as possible once I have a bigger sample size. So good luck in the arena, and I'll see you guys next time.